Okay, let's get started. Welcome everyone to the Hot Politics Lab, April 2021, or I don't know, 40th edition already. And here to stay for at least a couple of more weeks until the end of this year. And then we might actually have a hybrid meeting where some of us will be together, and but you'll still be able to follow us online. Today we have a great speaker, Theresa Kuhn, from the Department of Political Science, my department, and I'm very happy to have Teresa here today. She is actually in between two research groups, the Challenges Research Group, in which I am, and the Political Economy Group. And moreover, she's talking today to a mostly political psychology crowd. So it's really quite within the discipline of political science, it's really interdisciplinary what Teresa does. You might call it interniche. And so I'm very happy to have her as a colleague and recently also as a fellow director of the Challenges Research Group. So Teresa's talk will be about European identity. She's published extensively on this topic. And without further delay, I want to give you the floor, Teresa.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Before I start with my presentation, let me just say it's actually not so much about European identity for a change. It's actually about the European solidarity and risk sharing in the COVID-19 crisis. So identity, of course, plays a role, but in this part, it's actually going to be less about that particular angle. Can everybody see my screen? Let me just put, yes, here at the full screen. So in a way, it's very nice that we are presenting this paper here a year after the crisis struck, because basically around that time, I started talking to several colleagues of mine, Björn, Maurits, and Francesco, and we were thinking about how we could actually research EU solidarity and risk sharing in that particular crisis. And we received some funding from ACES, Amsterdam Center of European Studies, but also AMSIS, Inequality Studies, and also universities of Ghent and Nijmegen to conduct a survey experiment in 5 European countries. And I'm going to present some results of this experiment here. So again, this paper is co-authored with Björn Bremer, Maurits Meyers, and Francisco Nicoli. And I think I have seen both Björn and Maurits in the participants list right now. So I'm happy that they're also here, and I might give the floor to them for some questions. So questions of solidarity were really central in the European struggle to respond to the coronavirus crisis. And there we can say that actually the EU didn't really show, and especially the member states didn't show themselves from their best side. So a year ago, there was really quite some controversy about how the EU should respond, or member states should respond to this crisis. Italy and Spain were the countries that were hit most in the first wave of the crisis, and they historically have had also a hard time in the Euro crisis. So they were already on pretty unstable feet, and they actually asked for help from Northern European or other member states. And in the beginning, several member states, and most notably the Frugal Four, were very much hostile towards the idea of sharing resources and sharing risks in here. And here, especially the Netherlands and Wopke Hoekstra also really played a very dominant and not so positive role. It's quite interesting to see that a year later, even their Dutch colleagues think that he has a difficult negotiation style, because that also came very much to the fore in these debates a year ago. So this crisis really reinforced a divide between the North and the South that already existed due to the Eurozone crisis. And it really also brought it to the public debate. So here you see, for example, the cover of Elsevier Weekblad, where they depict the Northern Europeans as the hardworking, people, whereas the South is just basically laying in the sun and exploiting the work of the North. Against this backdrop, it was actually very interesting and very surprising that actually only 5 or 4 months later, in July 2020, national leaders agreed on a joint recovery and resilience facility of more than 600 billion euro. So this is really the centerpiece of the so-called Next Generation EU plan, which is really in a way groundbreaking and the largest ever recovery fund of the EU. It was also remarkable not only in terms of its size, but also because it relies on joint borrowing on financial markets, something that both national leaders but also citizens generally are quite critical about. And more than 50% of these 600 billion or 672 billion actually will be given in grants. So this means that member states individually don't have to pay them back. So this makes it quite a unique moment in European fiscal integration, and especially with respect to how divisive the situation was before. Against this backdrop, we conducted a survey and we asked several important questions here. So we wanted to know, what do citizens think about about European solidarity and risk sharing in this particular crisis? What drives support, and especially which aspects of these policy packages actually drive support? And then how is support structured within countries, but also across countries? And this question, of course, ties into a larger research agenda on public support for European solidarity that I'm researching on, but also my co-authors, and there's quite some research done on public support for international solidarity in the EU before the COVID crisis. So in the context of the Eurozone crisis, but also later with respect to the refugee crisis. And what we know from that research is that in general, people are less supportive of international solidarity than of national solidarity. And this has to do with a lot of different aspects. So from a social psychology perspective, that people are generally more likely to share with people that are more similar to them. And of course, member states combine people who share more traits, let's say it like this, than the EU with its currently 27 member states and different languages, different traditions. The other reason for that strong national solidarity is also just historical, that we have been in a way framed into national solidarity because of very strong national welfare states in Europe. So this makes it in a way difficult to overcome these national boundaries of solidarity. The people who are most likely to overcome these boundaries are people with European identity, those who are more highly educated. They show more support for European solidarity, but even they in general prefer to share at the national level. And you can also say that support for European solidarity is a bit more contingent upon how coverage, in a way, the conditions are to receive benefits. So people are a bit more critical about under which conditions somebody receives, other member states actually receive money than in national solidarity. There's some emerging research on solidarity, EU solidarity in the coronavirus crisis. And here we find generally that there's more support for medical solidarity. So, for example, sharing PPE or having patients being transferred into other hospitals than for financial solidarity. We also see here that cost-benefit calculations are really an important factor. But even in this crisis, there's some research that shows that, yeah, you can overcome national divides here and agree on some kind of joint definition. These studies are all based on 1 or 2 countries, important countries, of course, in this crisis, such as Germany or Italy. But we actually contribute here also by looking at several countries at the same time. Against this theoretical background, we conducted this study in July 2020 in 5 countries: France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Spain. And we chose these countries because, yeah, France and Italy, Italy and Spain were the countries that were most, that were hardest hit in the first wave. And the Netherlands was one of the most prominent opponents to European solidarity in this crisis, and Germany initially as well, and France was somewhere in between. In each country, we had a random sample of 1,500 respondents. We wanted to have a sample that is representative in terms of age, gender, education, and also regional distribution. So therefore, we imposed quota for these factors. And the conjoint that we in the end designed was based on the actual policy debate. And here we varied it on 6 important policy dimensions. Before I go into these dimensions, let me just quickly review what is a conjoint experiment. I'm sure that most of you are familiar with it, but maybe not everyone. So this is an experimental method embedded in surveys to estimate the impact of profile attributes on preferences for multidimensional issues, such as, for example, policies, but also candidates for political position, etc. And it works in the way that respondents they see different profiles, mostly 2 at a time. And these profiles differ on several dimensions, and respondents are then asked to rate and rank these profiles. And these profiles then refer to either policy proposals, candidates, or whatever you're actually interested in studying. It has the methodological advantage that these dimensions are randomly assigned, so it has a stronger leverage with respect to causality. Theoretically, it's also very interesting because you can elicit trade-offs that people face between these dimensions. In our particular question in the with respect to European solidarity in the COVID-19 crisis, we actually, and looking here at this recovery and resilience facility, we find that there are three meta dimensions, which we then split up in 6, I should say it like this. The first one is scope. So what is the purpose of this facility, of this fund, and how long does will it be in place? I'm sorry that there's the N missing. I have problems with my keyboard at the moment, so there's either 1 N missing or 1 too many. No, that's a different thing. Risk sharing. So how is risk being shared? And here we have the questions of how is it being financed? Is the facility being financed? How are the funds being distributed? And how are they repaid? And finally, the dimension of governance refers to the decision-making at which level it actually takes place. And so here we show you the different 6 dimensions and the possible options that we have identified for each of these dimensions. So the purpose of this facility can either be only focusing on healthcare, or it can also include the economy or healthcare and measures against climate change. So again, we really designed this with respect to the policy debate that was taking place at that time. And I will show you in a moment also how the current next generation EU actually looks like. So this is basically purpose is the first dimension of scope. The second dimension of scope refers to the duration. So how long will this facility be in place? And here it can be either fully terminated once the crisis is over, or it will be used in future crises. With respect to risk sharing, we have three different dimensions. The first one refers to financing. So this fund is financed either by just taking money from existing resources, such as the budget, or the EU borrows additional money on financial markets. With respect to repayment, this can either happen in forms of loans, so each country pays back what it receives, or it can happen in terms of grants, so money, all countries repay together, and rich actually pay more than the poor. Finally, with respect to the distribution of these funds, you could either have country size based distribution, so you receive the same per inhabitant, or a needs-based distribution that countries hit hardest by the crisis receive more. With respect to the governance, here we look at decision making, and it's either the European Commission, so a supranational institution that decides, or it's intergovernmentally, the finance ministers of member states decide together, or each finance minister decides individually. So you might ask how this now looks with the current Next Generation EU facility. So here we see that this is a facility that is focusing on healthcare and economy. It's a temporary facility. Money is borrowed additionally on financial markets. Countries repay together. Those hit hardest by the crisis receive more. So needs-based, and the European Commission is the main decision-making power. Here I'm showing you how this conjoint in the end looked for respondents. So they receive here two different policy packages and then have to give their opinion on which one they prefer and how they actually rate each of these options. This particular exercise was repeated 3 times. So we have 45,000 observations. In other words, each respondent rated 6 of these profiles. What I'm going to show you now is basically the effect of each individual attribute on support for such a package. And in other words, excuse me, more to the, if you see a figure more to the right, this means there's more support for a package because of a certain attribute, and figures more to the left, decreased support. And we actually see here that this is just general. So basically the main attributes, we see that people in general prefer a package that focuses on healthcare and climate change or the economy, so a more general package. And we see also that borrowing significantly decreases support for such a package. I don't go now through all steps. We see here in general that citizens prefer a scheme that focuses on healthcare and economy, draws on existing resources rather than borrowing, relies on loans, is needs-based with long-term duration and with intergovernmental decision-making. What we focused on here in this paper and also in the pre-registration plan was how this differs across countries. We were reluctant to really have hypotheses on the main effects because we thought it's difficult to identify a general pattern of how people across countries prefer this policy design. We actually think that there will be stark cross-country differences that reflect national interest. And here the main question is whether somebody is on the receiving or on the giving end. And our pre-registered hypothesis was that in Italy, Spain, and France, there will be a higher support for packages that have a wider scope, that are financed based on debt, with joint repayment. Distribution is based on needs or reflects needs, and with a long-term duration, because these are all aspects that are in the general national interests of these three countries, because especially Spain and Italy, and less so France, will actually receive something from this grant. And in general, the cross-country differences were less stark than we had expected. Nonetheless, in three particular cases, we do see significant cross-country differences. The first one is with respect to repayment. And here we see a clear cross-national divide between Italy and Spain, who want to have grants, and Netherlands, Germany, and France, who are more in favor of loans. I need to very quickly get something from against my cut. I'll be right back.
Yeah, go ahead. maybe a corona test, Theresa. Let me just fill up this little caveat in our presentation with, I see a lot of new people today again in the list of participants. So if you're interested in what we're doing, you can actually listen back or watch back all of the presentations we've had in the last year. You can go to Spotify or YouTube and type in the Hot Politics Lab, and you will find all of these talks. Moreover, if you are a PhD student and you would like to present, please let us know, because we have dedicated graduate Fridays where each time 2 PhD students will present. So just shoot me an email, and then we can book you in for the next semester. Wow, Theresa's back. Are you ready?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, good.
That's the disadvantage of working from home. You don't have anybody in the audience who brings you a glass of water or something.
Yeah.
So.
That's right.
Anyways, thanks, and sorry for the interruption, but I think it's in everybody's interest. I'm feeling a bit better again. So I started with this first cross-country difference between basically the two biggest recipient countries, Italy and Spain, and the rest who, and here Italy and Spain wanted to have grants, versus Netherlands, Germany, and to a lesser extent France were more supportive of loans. The next cross-country difference that we identify here is with respect to the duration of such a fund. And here, actually countries agree that it should be a long-term or permanent instrument. However, Italy, Spain, and France are more supportive, or I think even stronger about this. And then similarly, with respect to the distribution, all countries actually think that there should be a needs-based distribution. So those countries that need it most receive most, rather than size-based. But again, here, Italy and Spain, the ones who are on the receiving end, are most outspoken about this question. And then something that surprised us was that actually all the populations of all 5 countries are actually clearly against the idea of joint borrowing on the financial markets. So here, everybody just seems to be fiscally conservative and against the idea of making joint debt, no matter whether you gain from that debt in a way or not. We also looked at individual differences, and here maybe the results are very much in line with what we already know about European solidarity. So people who have more pro-European outlooks are more supportive of grants. needs-based distribution and of supranational governance. Left-wing voters are more in favor of grants and of climate change. And otherwise, and I should always say, when I say more supportive, I mean more than the anti-Europeans or the right-wing voters. And otherwise, however, there is strong agreement on the general policy design. So people generally seem to be able to agree on how such a fund should look like. We also looked at how this particular policy instrument that now has been agreed upon, Next Generation EU, how this is actually being supported. And here we see that it receives majority support, not only in the general, in the pooled sample, but also when we look at the individual countries. Not very surprisingly, the Netherlands are most critical about it, and Spain and Italy, the two recipient countries, are actually most supportive of it. Let me come to the conclusion. So in general, we find some support for risk sharing in this crisis, and also in particular for the instrument that is currently in place. In general, the differences across and within countries are probably less pronounced than we would have expected, and I think a lot of other people would have expected. There is agreement on certain dimensions, and very strongly so, especially with respect to joint borrowing, and there seems to be enough space for a compromise between and within countries. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Theresa, and I certainly hope you weren't counting on Maurits answering any difficult questions, because he just left. So. Okay, so as always, you can type your questions into the Q&A box that you can see in the middle of the Zoom bar, and I will read the questions out loud to Theresa, who will then hopefully answer any questions. Now that we're kind of waiting for the first questions to appear, let me ask you a question about conjoint experiments that I have always had, and I hope by now that there is actually some sort of a solution to this. How can you think about conjoint experiments in terms of statistical power and finding the effect sizes that we need, given the number of different profiles that people can see?
Yeah, so I mean, in general, there are some different ways of calculating power. They mainly refer to power with respect to the main dimensions and not with respect to interaction effects. So it's much less clear how you can calculate power with respect to, what does this mean for left versus right-wing respondents. With respect to the dimensions and also the amount of profiles, there is some new research, I think, by Kirk Bansek and colleagues that is very optimistic about how, or lets us be very optimistic about how many profiles you can actually show. So they, it's been a while since I read that paper, but I think they even say you can have up to 20 profiles that you're showing to respondents with the amount of respondents that we have here. So I think in our particular case, we were actually pretty conservative with only having 6 iterations or 6 different profiles. It's now done much more with many more profiles, but also more dimensions. With respect to the dimensions, I usually am hesitant to include more dimensions, not because of, dimensions don't really matter with respect to the power, but then the different attributes per dimension. I'm just generally a bit hesitant to overload that because it might just become too complicated for respondents. So the more dimensions you include, the more complex the whole issue becomes.
Yeah. And then regarding the number of rounds, did you see any differences between the rounds?
Yes, I think I conducted 3 different conjoints in the last year. So we, and maybe Björn can correct me on this one, I think people become a slightly more negative in the second and third round. But in general, the patterns remain the same. So there is some small effect of, okay, this is the 6th profile that I see, and I'm just a bit less enthusiastic about it. Yeah.
Okay. Also need to get a glass of water. I don't have any questions yet, so I do want to encourage you to ask a question. I can tell you that Theresa doesn't bite, so right. And even if she does, I mean, it's on Zoom, right?
It's exactly.
Don't worry. Hey, let me. What strikes me is that the responses of your respondents are very much. They're kind of very much in line with what you'd expect given the particular political, economic context of each of these countries. But what would be really the theoretical mechanism by which people come to these opinions?
Yeah, so here we actually, you are in a way hinting at our second experiment that we conducted here. So we had another priming experiment, and if we had already worked that out more, I probably would have presented that here, where people were informed about the voting decisions of their preferred party on such a fund. And here we actually saw that knowing what your party, how your party voted, also had an impact on your preference here. And I think in that respect, especially in this particular case, cues from parties and from national governments played, I think, a very strong role. So in general, I think with respect to solidarity in the EU, you can say there are 2 other dimensions that are important. One is, what do you generally think about our European integration? The other thing is, what is your left-right position? So people more generally on the left are also more in favor of solidarity. And then the third cue, in a way, is, what does your national government, and especially the parties that you actually prefer, think about this? And I think here in this particular case, we could see that third factor play really a big role. And it's not surprising, because in that particular time of the crisis, national governance played an important, more important role in politics than otherwise, because I mean, it was just a time dominated by press conferences. We all got to see our governments, our prime ministers, etc., almost on a weekly basis talking about this crisis. So I think people had more direct cues on how their governments thought about this than in normal political times.
Okay, thanks. Looking forward to seeing that second experiment. There's a question from Tobias Rohrbach, and he writes, interesting study. I may have missed this, but what statistical controls did you use for the models? For example, did you see any differences for gender?
Yeah, let me just think. It's been a while. So I think, I mean, in the first instance, we did control for the usual things such as gender, age, and education. Those controls, I think, here would mainly increase the efficiency of the model, and not so much in terms of the bias. I don't remember what we found with respect to gender. I think here it's most important to then just look at these interaction effects that we actually conducted with respect to the different dimensions and individual factors. And here, as I said, pro-European people were more in favor of grants than non-Europeans. So we also had some differences with respect to left and right. But we did not include any interactions with respect to gender. So I think, yeah, I would have to really look up the models and the tables to fully answer the question with respect to gender, but it did not seem to play an important role here. Let's put it like this.
Okay, thanks. Next question, Matthijs Roduin. Thank you, Theresa. Cool project. You frame it as a story on EU solidarity and risk sharing. My question is this: to what extent do you think your findings indicate that this is more a story about self-interest and less about the EU and risk sharing? Respondents in recipient countries want grants and are more supportive of long-term support. Others want loans and short-term duration. Do ideas about the EU itself really matter that much in this respect?
Yes, that's a good question. So I think first of all, we do see that at the individual level, questions of the EU itself also matter, so that people who are more pro-EU are in general more of a more generous and less strict coverage. And I think at the country level, we also see that in a certain way, in that, I mean, the Netherlands is also a country that is more Eurosceptic than probably Spain and Italy. And the question then is, of course, where does this Euroscepticism come from? And I think here self-interest always plays a big role. So I think solidarity is always impacted by questions of self-interest, and we also see that here. So I'm not sure whether we disagree so much, Matthijs. In I think we might just have a slightly different interpretation of what solidarity is, and the way that I see solidarity, it is not completely altruistic, but it's also a willingness to share risk and resources, also based on what you actually expect to get out of it. Yeah, let me think. Yeah, I think that's how I would answer the question.
Okay, and maybe Matthijs has a follow-up question. But in the meantime, Christian, you had a question too.
Yeah. Do you have any kind of like post-hockey idea why you did not find the preference for grants over loans in France?
That's a good question. Yeah, maybe France. I mean, France was somewhere in between, and maybe French people saw themselves more as being on the giving end than on the recipient end. So maybe it was less clear to the French respondents at that age, at that time. I'm just looking if Björn is still here. If Björn wants to just put something in the chat to answer this question, I'm happy to read it out. I think it just generally also reflects, I mean, and this was, I think, the thing that we were most surprised about was why are, across the board is everybody against joint borrowing? And I think both of these aspects have to do with people being relatively conservative when it comes to taking debts. So I think while people in Europe are willing to somehow, share resources and to help each other, this whole idea of, okay, let's go and make debt either individually or as a country or as the EU is something that a lot of people are a bit scared about. And I think this also comes back with respect to France. Okay, Björn writes something. He writes, it's a good question, but it probably also reflects the fact that historically France was always a net contributor rather than a net recipient. But to be honest, this is mostly a post hoc rationalization. Yeah. So, but I think, yeah, in a way, also what I hinted at, that they see themselves more as contributor. Thanks, Björn.
And on this theme, I mean, at least for the Netherlands, people take on huge debts, right? So it's or do you see this as a distinction between what people would do in their private lives and what people would want the government to do?
Yeah, I think I've been thinking about the Netherlands here because exactly I'm always struck by how much people take on debts in the Netherlands compared to Germany and Austria, for example. However, I think the Dutch see it very much as investment and not so much as a debt. So it's, I take on a debt to get a house, and this is how I invest in my house. So it's a very different framing at the individual level, I think. But I think, yeah, in the Dutch case, I think it might be more also just the idea of giving, I think here really of giving the money to other people. I think that just plays a big role here and to other countries.
Okay. There's a question from Haley Kelsall. Hi, Theresa. Thanks for this interesting presentation. I was wondering if you could reflect a little on how much or how little attitudes towards EU solidarity in this global crisis differ to other crises. Well, we've had a few in the last 10 years, so.
Yeah, thanks. It's a really interesting question. I think, I mean, we looked at for example, the question with respect to joint borrowing. This has been asked in previous surveys already also, and that is, for example, something that we also found back then, that people have always been very, hesitant to the idea that the EU should jointly borrow money on the financial market. So this is something that has remained relatively stable. With respect to other aspects, I think in this particular crisis, it's perceived more as an exogenous crisis. So Corona just hit as a virus. And in general, there's more support for solidarity, for European solidarity in exogenous crises than in endogenous crises, such as the sovereign debt crisis. However, also here we have to say that national framing plays a role. And of course, for example, the Netherlands wanted to frame Italy's problems in the beginning as, oh, they don't have their finances under control and they have a bad medical system. So also here, whether it is really perceived as exogenous or endogenous always depends on the framing. But I think in general, there is more support for solidarity in this particular crisis because it was much more seen as something that, as a risk from outside, and something that also could have happened to us, so to the Dutch, or it also did happen in the end. So I think in that respect, this joint fate and joint is playing a bigger role.
I'm amused by the fact you said that it happened to us in the end. I think you meant it happened to us a week later, but.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, I mean, even in summer, I mean, in summer 2020, when this recovery plan was agreed upon, the Netherlands was still, I mean, pretty positive about how everything had gone. And there were even these voices, oh, we exaggerated. And in the end, the whole crisis was not so big. So I think, yeah, it would be interesting to see how things would have evolved now with such a survey in a second wave now after survey wave after a couple of virus waves.
Good. Okay. Haley says thanks, and we have a next question from Matthijs. Could you tell us more about the role of political knowledge in such conjoint experiments? These are all pretty technical matters of which most people will probably be relatively ignorant. Mm-hmm. How have you dealt with this issue? I realize that looking at the moderation effect of education is problematic because education itself, of course, also affects these attitudes.
Yeah, so I mean, Yeah, there are several answers to this question. So first of all, so this is the third conjoint experiment that I have been co-producing with other people in a year. And this one was the one that we actually set up the most quickly because we had to, because we knew there was going to be a decision. With the other two, we had really pre-tests and also more qualitative pre-tests where we really piloted the study and to see what do people, how do people understand the survey, the questions, etc. And that actually showed us that people in general were quite able to understand the survey. There are also several robustness checks that we had included. The other thing is that even if people are not completely informed about the policy situation, we actually don't want to, we don't want to have an informed decision, but more like, okay, what is in a way also a bit their gut feeling about joint borrowing, etc. So we think there, okay, with a relatively, simple language, you can still get people's opinions on these quite complex issues. It's also important to know that we, for example, have also a attention check at the end of the survey, and there's also different ways to see whether people understood it by, for example, looking at inconsistent answer patterns. So that they say, I prefer package A, but then they give a better rating of package B, etc. So there are several ways to make sure that people in general understand it. And so with the 3 surveys that I have now conducted, I'm actually much more optimistic and positive about this method than I originally was. I was pretty critical in the beginning and thought it's way too complex, but in the end, a lot of people seem to be able to understand it and to that's the attention check, because they probably just scan the whole survey and read very quickly, whereas people with lower education really take the time to read it.
Really?
Yeah. So at least that's what we've had in several surveys now.
Oh wow, gee, I would take that out and publish it as a separate paper. that strikes me as very unexpected, yet very important.
Okay. Yeah.
But it may underline actually something else. It's not so much that they too quickly read the instructions. Maybe they do that too, but also that they are the ones with the more crystallized attitudes, and so that they are the ones that they kind of decide. They also read the treatment too quickly in that sense.
Yeah.
Do you have any data on this? I mean, did you look, for example, at how long people looked at the treatment texts?
I don't remember. I don't think we did that in this case. No. I think it was not really an option to. Yeah, I'm not sure anymore. Björn, if you remember, fill me in, please. But I don't remember. But it would be definitely interesting to look at. But I agree with you. So I think that people who are higher educated, they are, they're more used to skimming texts, and they probably might also do the whole experiment in itself quicker. But I don't have any data on it.
Yeah, or what I'm concerned with is people who take a lot of these surveys and then just try to finish it as quickly as possible, and then this might be correlated to being highly educated.
Yeah, I mean, in general, we were surprised that there were not so many people who didn't pass the attention check. Maybe also because they did so many of these surveys that they know how to look out for it. But it made us relatively optimistic about it. In a different conjoint on European unemployment insurance, we actually had an additional open question. So we first had people do these conjoint, and then we asked which of these dimensions did you find most important, or which, what was really guiding your preferences. And it was really interesting to see that. So, and we did that in 13 countries, and I think in 5 we actually took the time to really code the answers, and there was a correlation between what people gave in the open answers and what their answer pattern, the preference pattern in the conjoint. So that also really made us quite optimistic that actually conjoints are a good measure, a good way to analyze multi-dimensional preferences.
Yeah, maybe on that.
That's why I call it next generation EU.
Yes.
Yeah, next generation EU. Yeah, I think so. You can of course ask in a survey, what do you think of next generation EU? And then you get, depending on how you and I think so. First of all, these kind of conjoined experiments are very useful to really understand what is behind these preferences. So again, with, for example, this facility here, as I said, it depends very much on what is your EU preference, but what is your left-right orientation, and by looking at these different dimensions, you can then see, okay, certain people are in general in favor of a European scheme, but not if it's based on redistribution. So you can get basically different combinations of these latent dimensions. The other thing is that you can understand much more why certain people oppose, for example, such a facility, because you in a way you get just much more information out of people than just answering yes or no, or very much in favor or very much against such an issue. I think that is really the biggest advantage. There's also, of course, questions with respect to, really the causality, the causal impact of different dimensions. So in normal survey questions, you often have questions of endogeneity, so that people who think certain issues are important then also are more in favor of it. And the third aspect refers to social desirability. So you could imagine that a lot of people don't actually want to say that they are against joint borrowing. So if you just ask them one question about joint borrowing, they say, oh, it's actually not that bad. But combined all in one policy package, this particular issue is a little bit hidden. So people are less likely to just, hide their opinion on this. The whole social desirability is less obvious than in other cases. Björn also just writes something. So Björn writes that we don't have data on how long individual respondents have spent on the tasks, but we excluded respondents who have completed the entire survey extremely quickly as a robustness checks, but this did not change the results. Okay, and so we asked people whether they wanted to be recontacted, and only very few people didn't want to be recontacted. And so we think that only very few people were annoyed by the survey.
Yeah, I think just in general, I think acquiring response times of respondents is a really interesting measure. And this is quite typical in social psychology, but not in other fields. And it is quite easy if you do a Qualtrics design. It's just a box you need to tick.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's an interesting recommendation for the future.
Yeah.
Hey, there's one question, and we don't have a lot of time left, so I hope we can give a short answer. Matthijs asks, could you tell a bit more about why you think the effects regarding governance are small compared to the other effects?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it had probably, to do with the fact that it was maybe at that moment the question that was most abstract to people. So I think in that particular time when the survey was done, there was a lot of discussion about who should benefit from such a scheme and how should it be financed and should it be paid back. So really individual and country self-interest was very clear there. And with respect to, whether it's in the finance ministers or not, maybe this played a bit less prominent role in the public discussion. It might also be that people didn't really see so much of a difference between the Commission and a joint decision making by finance ministers. But again, this is a bit more post hoc than really clearly related to it. Maybe Björn wants to put something in the chat, then I can read it out.
Yeah. Then he has to be extremely quick because it's time to round up. It's almost 4 o'clock. Let me then first announce the schedule, and if Björn wants to add something, we can do that very quickly. Next week we have a talk by Liz Connors from the University of South Carolina. It's titled "Partisan Social Pressure and Effective Polarization." Highly relevant topic, of course. And then the week after that, we have Graduate Friday again with 2 talks by first by Tobias Wittmann on titled "How Renewable Energy Divides Politics: The Impact of Wind Turbines on Moral Emotional Language in Political Discourse." And we also have a talk by Maaike Homan, which is officially still to be announced, but I think this will be about recognizing anger in female politicians. Then we have a bit of a break. There are a couple of public holidays and a personal holiday, I must say. So we reconvene May 21st with Cameron Brick. All right. Yes. Bert, by the way, apologizes that he couldn't be here. He actually was supposed to join us halfway, but even that wasn't possible due to all kinds of nasty Corona stuff. Nothing to add, I read here. Okay, great. Thank you, Björn, for your assistance. And you and Theresa have deserved a hot politics coffee mug, like all our presenters. And once I'm back in my office, I'll start distributing those. And at least for you, Theresa, it will be very easy for me. It's just one door. And where's Björn at? Which university?
Cologne, Max Planck Institute.
Okay. Well, that's a bit longer, but yeah, hopefully I will get it to you somewhere later this year. Okay, thanks a lot, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Theresa. Thank you, Björn, and thanks for all the questions. And I hope to see you next week with Liz Connors. Goodbye.
Thanks.